Hey guys, tonight we venture deep into the untamed American wilderness, where the only thing louder than your heartbeat is the crack of an axe against bark. The air smells like wet leaves and primal fear. It's dusk and you're standing in a clearing that doesn't want you here. Trees lean in like gossiping elders, moss clings to every stone, and somewhere uncomfortably close, a coyote just remembered you're made of meat. There's no path, no welcome sign, just you, your tools, and the gnawing realization that a roof won't magically appear. You've got to build it from nothing, literally. No nails, no power tools, no helpful YouTube tutorials unless you brought a time-traveling iPad, which honestly would have been smart. And if you're wondering how long you'd survive out here, about 3 days. 2, if you're picky about food. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grip your axe like it owes you money. The metal is cold, the handle is splintery, and your palms are already regretting every decision that brought you to this moment. Welcome to the frontier, the late 1700s, maybe early 1800s. Exact years blur here. Most men don't live long enough to buy a calendar. Around you, dense timberland stretches for miles. Oak, pine, and hickory trees pressed together so tightly, the sky's more of a rumor. There's no town, no other cabin in sight. You are alone, but not exactly unobserved. Every rustle could be a raccoon, or a cougar, or worse, your own imagination chewing through its leash. The first step, clearing the land. Clearing sounds almost poetic, like a gentle opening in the forest, kissed by sunlight and songbirds. In reality, it's 4 hours of hacking through shrubs, ferns, and saplings that scream in plant language with every swing. You sweat through your shirt, swat away horseflies the size of baby fists, and learn very quickly that stumps don't come out just because you really want them to. There's no chainsaw, no tractor, no chemical herbicide. It's you versus everything green and rooted. The axe head bites into a sapling, and it takes 8 swings to bring it down. Multiply that by 200. You begin to understand why many frontier men didn't start families until their late 30s. They were too busy fighting trees. Mainstream fact break. Most early frontier cabins were built on patented or claimed land, often without formal permission. Settlers would mark their territory by tomahawking trees, cutting blazes into trunks to claim a plot. And while you're hacking through the underbrush, let's toss in a fringe gem. Some settlers believed that whistling while cutting trees would confuse forest spirits and keep bad luck away. You try it. It doesn't help. A bird poops on your hat. After 6 hours of labor, you've cleared a small patch, maybe 30 feet across. Not much, but enough to pitch a temporary lean-to. You lash together a crude frame of branches and drape it with leafy boughs. It leaks. The wind cuts through the gaps like gossip through a frontier town. You try to sleep curled like a sad pretzel while something scratches near your feet. Scholars still argue whether settlers genuinely preferred isolation or if it was more a grim necessity. Many left the East due to land scarcity debt or a disagreement with local law enforcement. Freedom, it turns out, often comes with fleas. Morning arrives with no ceremony, just damp clothes and a sore spine. You eat a piece of jerky that's closer to leather than meat swig. Some lukewarm creek water, you'll regret that later, and limp back into the clearing. You walk the perimeter of your future home trying to picture it. 4 walls, maybe 1 room. A roof if you're lucky. You pace it out 12 by 14 feet. Cozy if you're a raccoon. You drive 4 sharpened stakes into the corners, marking where the foundation logs will sit. There's no blueprint. Your design is mostly vibes. You look at the forest again. Every log you need is out there growing smugly in the dirt. Your back sighs preemptively. There's a reason frontier cabins were small. Less to heat, less to build, and less distance to crawl when the fever hits. You wonder if anyone ever enjoyed this phase. If some men whistled while they cleared brush, dreaming of warm fires and stew pots. You, however, just dream of your mattress back home. Too bad it's 200 years away. By midday, the lean-to collapses. The wind takes it like a joke that's gone on too long. You scowl, swat another fly, and get back to hacking. You think about naming this place. Something hopeful like Prospect Hill or honest like Blister Gulch. Your shirt sticks to your skin. Your hands develop hot spots. Your stomach growls like a judgmental dog. And still the land isn't ready to let you in. This is a game of patience, and the forest has centuries on you. Then finally, you step back and see it, a crude, ugly, glorious clearing, the floor of your new world. A place where maybe, just maybe, you won't freeze to death by November. Just as you're about to rest, you hear it, the unmistakable snap of a twig behind you. You freeze. Slowly turn. Nothing's there. Probably. But you suddenly realize you're not as alone as you thought. You're standing dead still. Not because you're brave, but because your knees won't move. Behind you, the forest has gone unnervingly quiet, like it's holding its breath. You listen hard. Wind. Nope. Birds silent. That one squirrel that won't shut up, even he's taken the afternoon off. Then crunch. Just one step. Not yours. Your grip on the axe tightens, which is funny considering how slippery your palms have just become. Every frontier man tells himself he's ready for this moment, whether it's a bear, a stranger, or something worse. But when it comes, you realize your only defense is a very sharp stick and a lot of unfinished thoughts. You spin around. Nothing. Well, trees, sure. Trees and undergrowth and the deep green blur of untouched forest. But whatever or whoever was there is gone now. You exhale slowly. Probably just a deer, you mutter, loud enough to warn off anything with teeth. Probably, but now your nerves are alive. Every tree has a face. Every shadow moves, which in a way helps sharpen your senses, because today's real task isn't fighting ghosts, it's choosing where exactly you're going to plant your roots. Your home can't float in the air. You need the perfect patch of land. And out here, the word perfect means won't kill you in 3 months. You walk the edge of your rough clearing, scouting like a predator. Not for prey, but for safety, for advantage. You kneel, press your fingers into the dirt. It's dry, but not too dry. No standing water nearby. That's good. Fewer mosquitoes, less rot, fewer chances for the cabin to sink into a future U-shaped pit. Mainstream fact break. Settlers often chose land near a water source, but not too near. Swamps brought disease. Rivers flooded. And streams could freeze over at exactly the moment you most needed a drink. You move to higher ground, a slight rise with a good line of sight. That's better. You'll be able to spot anyone approaching, or anything, and you won't wake up floating in your bed after the spring melt. You start checking for trees. You need tall, straight ones, your future cabin walls. You walk like you're shopping, eyes tracing trunks, ignoring knots, testing the grain with a knock of your knuckles. Pine is good light and easy to work with. Oak is better, strong, durable, harder for bullets to pass through. Just saying. You make mental notes. That one's too twisted. That one forks too low. That one has bees. Definitely skip the bee tree. Then you spot it. A perfect stand of straight pine, maybe 15 feet tall, each growing close together, like a lineup of ready soldiers. Your cabin's bones. All they need is your axe and your willingness to destroy your spine. But before you start swinging, you look back at your clearing. Stand there a while. Imagine where the walls will go, where the hearth might be, the bed, the door, where you'll sit and eat something hot someday, with fingers that aren't trembling. There's a debate here, and historians still argue whether frontier men truly planned their builds, or if it was more start hacking and see what happens. Based on how many cabins collapsed within a year, the second theory seems likely. Still, you try to picture it. You mark out the shape with stones and broken sticks, 12 by 14 feet. No need for luxury, just something that won't crush you in your sleep. You lay out the long wall first, 12 feet across, north-facing so it'll catch the least wind. You imagine the sun rising behind it, warmth flooding in through cracks, maybe even a window someday. Just one. Let's not get carried away. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some frontier men, particularly in Pennsylvania Dutch areas, use divining rods not just for water, but to pick blessed spots for homes. You don't have a rod, so you hold out your arm and spin around slowly. The place you stop. It's flat and doesn't smell like death. That's good enough. Back at the tree line, you scratch a mark into each tree you plan to cut. 15 logs, at least. That's just for the walls. The roof, that's a future you problem. Right now, you're just making a claim. Like a gambler eyeing a deck, daring the wilderness to call your bluff. You know what's funny? The forest doesn't care. Not about your plans, not about your dreams, not about your shaky grip on an axe that's already nicked your ankle once today. But you care. You have to. Because if you don't, this land will erase you faster than a creek after rain. Evening creeps in again. Fast. It always moves fast out here. No streetlights. No glowing signs. Just a slow drain of light pulling the color from the world, until even your hands look gray. You toss together another lean-to. Better this time. Less twig pile, more maybe shelter. You line it with evergreen boughs, pile rocks near the edge to block the wind. It'll hold. Or it won't. Dinner is more jerky. You chew like a cow and stare into the trees. The sounds returned now, night creatures arguing about who gets to eat whom. A raccoon waddles into view. You name him Carl. He judges you, then vanishes. You lie down in your pine needle bed, staring up at a slice of stars through the trees. No roof, no walls. Just dreams stacked higher than your ability to fulfill them. Tomorrow, the cutting begins, and once you start, there's no going back. You wake to cold dew clinging to your eyelids and a beetle having an existential crisis on your chin. The forest doesn't do snooze buttons. It's light or it's not. And now it very much is. You sit up, joints popping like twigs. Your spine feels like it slept in a bear trap. And your right hand, your axe hand, has already started complaining. But there's no time to listen. Today's the day you actually begin. Step 1, cutting logs. Step 2, wondering why you thought this was a good idea. Step 3, repeating steps 1 and 2 until you either have a cabin or a medical condition. You walk to the stand of trees you marked yesterday. Morning mist still curls around their trunks. They look taller today, like they grew overnight just to spite you. You pick the first one tall, straight. No obvious branches till the top. A perfect future wall. You plant your feet, grip your axe, and swing. The first strike is always ceremonial. Loud, clean, almost satisfying. You feel powerful. Then you realize that one swing didn't even nick the bark. So you swing again, and again, and again. 20 swings later, the tree's only thinking about falling. You question every life decision you've made since age 5. Mainstream fact break, frontier axes weren't delicate. Most were broad-headed single-bit tools that weighed 3 to 5 pounds, designed for both felling trees and lopping off limbs, tree limbs mostly. Men were expected to cut a full-grown tree in under an hour. You laugh at that now, loudly, bitterly. You fall into a rhythm hack step, breathe hack again. Chips fly, sweat drips into your eyes. You chew air like it owes you money. The tree groans, shudders. Then finally, it starts to fall. And here's the best part. Trees don't fall gently. They crash, with weight and rage and an explosive burst of everything nearby. You leap back, heart sprinting as the trunk slams into the earth and sends a tremor through your legs. You did it. One log down, only a dozen or so more to go. It's going to be a long week. You sit on the stump for a minute. Breathe. Let your arms stop vibrating. Somewhere above, a hawk circles, maybe impressed, maybe waiting for you to die and turn into leftovers. Either way, you're flattered. You strip the fallen log of its branches using the back of your axe. Some snap off easily. Others cling like they've got something to prove. The bark comes off in wet strips, flaking into ribbons. You'll need to peel most of it off. Bark left on logs rots faster and also gives bugs an all-inclusive resort to infest. And speaking of bugs, here's a quirky tidbit. Some frontiersmen smeared pine tar or even bear grease on their skin to keep insects away. You try swatting at a mosquito with your elbow and wonder if you should start hoarding raccoon fat, just in case. Now comes the log hauling. Hauling implies you have help. You don't. No ox, no mule, just your own wobbly knees and sheer human stubbornness. You drag the log like a caveman moving a spouse-shaped rock, inch by inch, over roots, rocks, and the unrelenting judgment of gravity. Historians still argue whether early settlers used primitive log rollers or just brute force for this part. Most agree that teamwork, when available, helped. But you're alone. So you invent a system involving 2 saplings as levers and a lot of grunting. It's slow. It's ugly. But it works. By midday, you've felled 3 trees. That's it. 3. Your muscles are humming a funeral dirge. Your hands are blistered and your left boot has a mysterious hole. You eat a chunk of dry bread that tastes like sawdust, then lie down for 5 minutes that turn into 30. The next few days blur. Tree after tree comes down, each one like a small personal victory. You measure them by sight, lining them up like giant puzzle pieces waiting to be stacked. Long ones for the side walls, shorter ones for the ends, a few thinner ones for the loft if you ever get that far. Eventually, you end up with a small stockpile of logs near your clearing. They sit in a half circle waiting. Silent, heavy, full of promise and spite. You're starting to see it. The outline. You pace the spot again, dragging your foot through the dirt. This corner here where the first log will sit. That edge there where the door will be. You find a big flat rock and decide it's your threshold. You name it, the Stone of Regret. Has a nice ring to it. Now for some math. Rough frontier math. You calculate your cabin will be 7 logs high. That's about 10 feet. Sounds reasonable. You measure your longest logs 12 feet. Just enough for each wall. And you'll notch them so they interlock. Like a giant Lincoln log set, but with more hernias. You grab a piece of charcoal and draw in the dirt. A rectangle. roughly accurate. You add little squares for windows, then erase them. You're not that ambitious. Open scholarly debate. There's still discussion about how much planning actually went into frontier cabins. Some scholars argue men brought plans or memory from home countries, like German blockhouses or Irish stone cottages. Others say it was pure improvisation dictated by terrain and weather. Judging by your own process, it's 90% desperation, 10% vibes. As the sun starts to sink again, you sit on one of your logs and watch the trees sway. You feel proud, sort of. Achy, blistered, slightly concussed, but proud. You haven't built anything yet, but the pieces are coming together. You fall asleep that night next to your logs under a sky scraped raw with stars. The forest hums. The wind nudges your tarp lean-to, and your axe sleeps beside you like a loyal dog with violent tendencies. Tomorrow, notching. That's when it gets really interesting. The fourth morning greets you with stiff fingers, a bruised shoulder, and something that might be a tick doing a victory dance on your ankle. The lean-to has half collapsed again, and your firewood is damp because you forgot once again that fire doesn't like morning dew. But hey, at least you haven't been eaten. That counts for something. You glance at your pile of logs, all 17 of them, stripped, barked, measured, and waiting like a lineup of incredibly judgmental whales. Now comes the next phase, turning those logs into walls, which means notching. You squat beside the first log and give it a once-over. Pine still slightly sticky with sap, light enough to lift with a grunt and a curse. This will be one of your base logs, the foundation beam. But to make it fit with the others, you'll need to carve a notch on each end. Not too deep, not too shallow, just enough so it interlocks with the perpendicular log without crumbling like a sad wooden sandwich. Mainstream fact break. The most common frontier notch was the saddle notch, used for its simplicity and stability. Others included the dovetail, harder but self-locking, the square notch, fast but weaker, and the get frustrated and give up notch, which you're currently inventing. You drag the first log into place, laying it down with a satisfying thud. Then out comes your axe again, not for swinging this time, but for carving. Precision is key. Every angle must matter, which is unfortunate because your hand-eye coordination is currently ranking about a 3 out of 10. You mark out a rough U-shape with charcoal at each end, then start hacking away. Chop, chip, shave. It's a slow, brutal dance, wood chips in your eyes, sap on your shirt, and a steadily growing notch that may or may not be the right depth. You test it against a perpendicular log. It sort of fits. Good enough. The second notch goes faster. The third, even faster. You start getting cocky. That's when you almost lose a finger. You slam the axe too hard, and the blade skips, grazing your glove and digging into the dirt inches from your thigh. You freeze. Your heart forgets how to beat for a second. You sit back, breathing hard, staring at your trembling hand. Then you laugh, a shaky, surprised little sound. This place really doesn't want you alive. Quirky tidbit. Some frontiersmen believed that a drop of blood on the first log of the cabin sealed the home like a primitive blessing. You stare at the nick on your knuckle and decide, sure, let's go with that. Congratulations. The cabin is now spiritually waterproof. The next step, stacking. And stacking logs without a team or pulley system is like trying to win a wrestling match against a tree you already lost to yesterday. You build a crude ramp using 2 small logs as runners, then roll the first beam into place. It sits there, proud and wide and slightly crooked. You adjust it with a rock. Close enough. Second log, perpendicular, notched to fit. You lift it. Groan. Grunt. Your spine makes a noise like wet rope. And somehow the notch fits. They lock together like puzzle pieces made by a drunk Viking. That's your first corner, and it's beautiful. Lopsided, splintery, slightly cursed, but beautiful. Historians still argue whether cabins were built notch first or log stacked and trimmed as needed. You suspect the answer is whatever didn't kill you. In your case, it's a little of both. You keep going. Notch, stack, adjust. The wall begins to rise log by log, inch by inch, each one heavier than the last. You pause often to wipe sweat from your brow and whisper sweet profanities to the mosquitoes orbiting your ears. By mid-afternoon, you have half the first wall. You sit down on a stump, utterly wrecked. Every muscle screams. Your arms feel like hollow noodles filled with regret. But you look at that growing wall and feel something strange accomplishment. You built that. With your hands. Your very clumsy, blistered hands. You snack on hard bread and jerky watching the wind dance through the clearing. A blue jay lands on your threshold stone and screams at you for no reason. You nod solemnly. Yeah, I get it, you say. I'd scream too. Then you get back to work. As the sun starts to slant low, you hit a problem. One of the logs doesn't line up. It's too warped, curved like a banana left in the sun. You try to force it. It rocks, wobbles, refuses. You kick it. It rolls away smugly. You sigh, grab another log, and set it in place instead. Better. Not perfect, but better. You'll deal with the rebel log later. Maybe make a bench out of it. Or firewood. Firewood is satisfying revenge. You realize then how little room for perfection the wilderness allows. Nothing out here fits together neatly. Not the trees, not the ground, not your expectations. You learn to adapt, to shape the logs instead of shaping the forest. That's the real trick of frontier building, working with what the land gives, not fighting it every step of the way. The light fades. You stare at your half-finished base wall, now 3 logs high. It looks absurdly small compared to the effort, but it's progress. Visible, undeniable progress. You build a better lean-to tonight. Strengthen the frame. Stack some logs to shield against wind. You even rig a little shelf for your tin cup. It tips over instantly, but still points for effort. As you lie down, you hear a distant owl hooting, and farther off, the sharp bark of a fox. The forest feels less alien now, less like an enemy, more like a stubborn neighbor. You roll onto your side, one hand still lightly touching the axe beside you. The stars wheel overhead, and in your dreams, you're still carving notches, except the logs are snakes, and they whisper insults in Old English. You wake up sweating. The log rolls sideways and slams into your shin. Not enough to break anything, just enough to ruin your morning. You stagger back, cursing under your breath with the sort of language the raccoons probably find offensive. It's the 7th log you've tried to haul this morning, and already your arms feel like boiled rope. Welcome to Hauling Day Part 2. The logs you cut earlier. They're waiting. Patient. Heavy. Smug. And unfortunately, they're not going to levitate themselves into place. You build a new kind of ramp, less clever engineering, more pile of whatever looks vaguely like a slope. 2 logs side by side, braced by stones. You wedge branches underneath to stabilize it. You test it with your boot. It creaks ominously. Good enough. Then you roll up your sleeves, which, are already torn. Brace yourself and start pushing. The log groans, grates, and drags across the forest floor, like it knows you skipped leg day for your whole life. The humidity's rising already. Your shirt clings to you like wet paper. Every breath tastes like leaf mold and damp bark. And let's not even talk about the mosquitoes at this point. They know your blood type, family history, and worst insecurities. You push harder. The log shifts up the ramp, wobbling. Your knees buckle slightly, your back screams in ancient Latin, but it gets there. One more wall log in place. Mainstream fact break, frontier men often worked in teams, neighbors and kin, rotating help from one homestead to the next. Raising bees or house raisings were common, a day of heavy lifting, followed by food, drink, and awkward fiddle dancing. Alone, though, things moved slower, much slower. You're learning that firsthand. Once you've got the next 2 logs in place, it's time to pause and assess. Your walls now stand 4 logs high. The corners are holding. The notches interlock. There's even something cabinish about it when you squint and tilt your head just right. But you still need more logs, heavier logs. You consider dragging one of the monsters you cut on day 1. It's long, thick, and barely peels. The kind of log that doesn't want to be part of a house. More like it wants to roll downhill and crush wagons. Still, you need it. You hook a rope around it. The rope frays just from looking at the thing. You dig in your heels and pull, inch by inch. You grunt, huff, swear, repeat. This goes on for hours. Quirky tidbit, some settlers used children as log haulers. Not kidding. Boys as young as 10 were expected to drag branches and small trunks. Girls too, especially in families without sons. Childhood was basically unpaid labor with occasional cornbread. You begin to appreciate the existence of pulleys, of oxen, of mechanical advantage in general. But you've got none of that. Just your aching body and a stubborn streak as wide as the Mississippi. Finally, you get the beast log into place. You notch it with careful precision, your hand now steadier, more confident. You've figured out the swing rhythm, the grain texture. You even start humming to yourself just to drown out the tinnitus. Then, disaster. You try to roll the log up the ramp, but halfway up one side slips. The log tilts, teeters. You jump aside just in time to avoid a cartoon-style flattening. It crashes back down, tearing part of the ramp with it. You sit down hard, dizzy and gasping. That was too close. Historians still argue whether frontier cabins were death traps in disguise or just poorly supervised personal experiments. Judging by your near-death log incident, the answer is yes. You rebuild the ramp. Reinforce it with more stones. Wedge a heavy branch behind the base as a break. Then try again. This time it works. The log settles into place with a deep, final-sounding thunk. Your corner joints tighten. The structure stiffens, like a skeleton slowly taking shape. It's starting to feel real. You're not just playing wilderness LARP anymore. You're building an actual shelter, a home, a fortress against cold wind, bears, judgmental squirrels. And speaking of squirrels, you spot one now, sitting on the far end of your log pile, watching you like a tiny foreman, probably thinking, this idiot's gonna die before chinking. You nod at him solemnly. Not today, demon fluff. Late afternoon slides in. You stack a few more logs. The walls now rise past your waist. You can walk inside the shape of the house. It's still open to the sky, but when you stand in the center, it feels different, quieter. Like the trees are beginning to accept this strange wooden scar in their midst. You start hearing your own echo. That's new. You take a moment to imagine the finished cabin roof overhead, smoke curling from a stone chimney firelight, dancing on rough plank floors. You sitting at a table made from leftover logs, sipping something hot. Maybe whiskey, maybe pond water. Who can say? Open scholarly debate. Some believe that early cabins had floors from day one punched into the soil and leveled with stone. Others argue most pioneers lived on packed dirt floors for months or even years, before installing planks. Based on your current setup, dirt is winning. The sun begins its slow golden crawl toward the trees. You look down at your hands, blistered, pine-stained, trembling from exertion. You flex your fingers, count them. Still 10. That's a good day. You build another fire. This one catches faster. You've learned the trick: dry moss-shaved bark, a bit of patience. You cook something that resembles food, a bit of dried meat, some boiled leaves you hope aren't poisonous, and what might be wild onion. You lean back against your fourth wall log. Let the heat soak into your skin. Stare up at the open sky. It's not comfortable, not safe, not finished. But it's yours. And tonight, under a canvas of stars and wood smoke, that's enough. The sixth morning begins with a surprise: your left hand doesn't work. Well, technically, it's still attached and moving, sort of. But your fingers feel like overcooked sausages, swollen stiff and deeply resentful of the axe lying beside you. You flex them slowly, wincing. Yesterday's log-hauling marathon didn't just take a toll, it sent a bill, and your body is paying in full. But there's no rest in the wilderness. A cabin won't notch itself. Today, it's all about precision, not strength, not endurance, but the quiet art of shaping one log so it interlocks with another. No nails, no screws, just geometry, gravity, and your very questionable measuring skills. You rise, stretch, and approach your growing structure. 6 logs high now, each corner locked with rough but functional notches. You run your hand along one beam. It's crooked. The gap between logs is wider than you'd like, but that's a problem for chinking day. You're already dreading chinking day. For now, it's about getting those notches right, because a bad notch doesn't just look ugly. It invites drafts, water, and eventually gravity to do its worst. You start with one of the shorter logs. These are for the end walls, lighter, more manageable. You mark out the saddle notch, a concave curve that'll cradle the log it rests on. Axe in hand, you begin the slow, controlled carving. This isn't swinging anymore. It's shaving, chipping, coaxing. You chip down in V-shapes, alternating sides, until the wood begins to curl like soft butter. Well, soft, splintery butter. Mainstream fact-break saddle notching was preferred by Appalachian settlers due to its simplicity and forgiving nature. It allowed for a tight fit even on irregular logs, and was less likely to split the wood compared to square or dovetail styles. You fit the log onto the corner. It rocks slightly, your notch is a bit too shallow. Off it comes. More shaving, more checking. You feel like a slightly deranged carpenter reenacting a one-man version of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Too shallow, too deep, almost just right. Eventually, it slides into place with a satisfying thunk. The sound is deeply addictive, like locking a puzzle piece into place. You sit back and exhale through gritted teeth. Progress. Quirky tidbit. Some superstitious settlers carved small faces or runes into their corner notches to watch the home and ward off evil spirits. You pause, grab a charcoal nub, and sketch a crude smiley face inside your next notch. You name him Doug. Doug, the log demon. May he protect you from wobbly corners and creeping dread. After a few more hours, you've notched and set 3 more logs. The cabin walls now rise above your chest. Inside, it's starting to feel enclosed. Still open to the wind and sky, yes, but there's an illusion of shelter now. The logs muffle outside sounds, bird calls, wind, distant creaks. You even start to notice echoes when you speak aloud. Home, you mutter. Your voice bounces back, quieter. Unsure. You pause for water, lukewarm creek water again, and you're now 70% confident the weird taste is just minerals. Maybe. Then it's back to carving. By now your arms move with practiced rhythm. You don't think, you just notch. The axe sings a slow, purposeful tune. Chop, tap, scrape, test. Over and over again. Then you mess one up. You take too much from the right side of a notch. The log leans, slides, and splits a thin crack halfway down. You freeze, heart thudding. A cracked log could compromise the whole wall. You whisper apologies to it. Pet it. Then reinforce the split with 2 pegs hammered in diagonally, your very primitive version of a brace. Historians still argue whether single-man cabins often used pegs or wedges as reinforcement, or if that's more of a romantic myth. Some believe pegs came later once settlers had time to refine their builds. Others insist makeshift joinery was common, especially among solo homesteaders like, you. The sun begins to tilt westward. Shadows grow long. You sit back and count your handiwork. 10 logs stacked, each corner notched and interlocked. You run your hands over the topmost beam and feel the grain, the bumps, the irregularities. Imperfect but strong. You've started talking to your logs, not in a creepy way, just friendly, encouraging. Each one has a personality. That short, stubby one on the northwest wall. You call him Stubby Greg. He was a nightmare to notch, but fits like a dream. The long, curved one on the east side, Snake Mike. Still gives you trouble. You eat dinner sitting inside your half-shell of a home. There's no roof, no floor. But when the wind picks up, it moves around the walls instead of through them. That's a first. And when the sun dips, low golden light spills in through the future doorframe. You sit in that glow like a cat soaking in the temporary illusion of peace. Tonight, the fire burns hotter. The lean-to is reinforced with 2 extra logs and a mossy tarp you found stuffed under your toolkit. You lie down, arms aching, but your mind racing. You imagine the finished cabin, a small hearth in the corner, a sleeping loft above, a peg on the wall for your coat, a shelf for a tin cup. A window, maybe, if you survive another week without snapping your spine. As sleep drifts in, you hear a branch snap in the woods. You sit up instantly alert. Silence. Then a rustle. Probably a deer or a raccoon. Or your imagination once again staging a comeback. But you rest your hand on your axe handle anyway, just in case Doug the log demon is taking the night off. Morning finds you sitting on the cabin's threshold, while the bottom log that will become the threshold chewing a strip of jerkus saw that tastes increasingly like boot leather and staring up at your creation. 7 logs high now. The walls cast actual shadows. When you stand inside the perimeter, the space no longer feels like a clearing pretending to be a shelter. It feels like the beginnings of a home, a rough one. An unapologetically lopsided, insect-infested one, but a home nonetheless. And today you do something dangerous. You imagine finishing it. Not someday, not eventually, but soon. That's when the top log shifts. Only a little, just a wobble, but enough to remind you that gravity never takes a day off. A gust of wind follows, brushing through the open roof space like it's testing the cabin's resolve. The log creaks. You step back slowly, eyes narrowing. This part, stacking walls without them falling, is not the glamorous phase. This is the phase where one wrong bump means 2 weeks of work collapses in one glorious bone-snapping crash. So now it's time for bracing. You drag 2 small logs to opposite corners and lash them diagonally to the structure, primitive cross-bracing, just enough to stabilize the walls until the roof locks everything in place. You wedge stones under sagging edges, add a few upright posts to the doorway and corners. It's all temporary, ugly as sin, and built entirely on hope and paranoia. Mainstream fact break. Many frontier builders used temporary cribbing, stacked stones, stakes, or logs to hold corners in place while the walls went up. Once the structure reached roof height, the overlapping beams would keep everything stable. You resume stacking. Log 8 goes up. It's lighter and you've now perfected the notching ritual. Chip, shave, test, adjust. Like a symphony played on an axe. You notice something strange as you work silence. Not just peaceful quiet, but actual soundproofing. Inside the partially built walls, bird calls dull. Wind softens. Your own hammering becomes muted. It's the first time you've heard the forest from inside something, not against it. The effect is eerie, but comforting. Log 9 is trickier. It's long but warped with a gentle twist in the middle. You lay it in place, but it rocks back and forth like a wooden seesaw waiting to kill you. You debate reshaping it. Then you remember Stubby Greg and Snake Mike. Imperfection is the rule here. You grab your axe and deepen the notches on one end. Then wedge in 2 thin slats of bark as shims. The log settles. Not perfectly, but enough. You nod once as if sealing a pact. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some early cabins were deliberately built with uneven corners. Not because the builders were lazy, though. Possibly. But because they believed irregular walls helped confuse evil spirits who couldn't navigate non-symmetrical spaces. The early American equivalent of ghost-proof feng shui. You smile at that wiping sweat from your brow. Maybe that's why nothing you've built is square. You're not unskilled, you're superstitious. By mid-afternoon, you reach log 10. This is the tricky one. The height now requires more than just brute force, you need leverage. You build a crude scaffold using 2 uprights and a crossbeam, then create a sloped ramp of logs and packed dirt leading up the side wall. You test it. It wobbles. You brace it with a prayer. Then comes the hauling. The log is heavy, denser than it looks. You heave, push, and wince your way up the ramp, stepping carefully 1 boot at a time. At the top you pause, knees bent, arms screaming, and guide the log over the top of the wall. It tilts, balances, then drops into place. A perfect, albeit precarious fit. You exhale slowly, then sit on the top log and let your legs dangle over the edge. The view is new. From up here, the forest looks different, less intimidating, more like a sea of green ripples. You can see the tree line curve, the shape of the land, even a faint glimmer of the creek in the distance. And inside your cabin, shade. Real, honest shade. The sun filters through the gaps, yes, but the upper logs are finally offering protection. It's cooler inside now. You step down, sit in the corner, and close your eyes. The scent of sap and dirt surrounds you. Historians still argue whether early settlers actually finished their walls before roofing, or if they built half walls and rushed to add the roof first to beat incoming weather. Evidence suggests both happened, depending entirely on how many storm clouds were involved. You glance at the sky. No clouds yet. Good. You mark a spot for the door. It's centered on the shorter wall, 5 feet high, 2 feet wide. You plan to cut it out after the structure's more stable. Right now, it's just a gap in your dreams. The doorway you keep stepping over like a very primitive burglar. You think about windows, then stop thinking about windows. No. 1 opening is enough. You're not building Versailles. As evening comes, you test your bracing again. The walls feel solid. The top logs don't shift under pressure. You tug, knock, lean, still holding. You smile. Then you say something aloud you probably shouldn't. This might actually work. A nearby crow cackles, loudly. You cook a small stew over the fire, wild onion, something vaguely edible that looks like a potato and a sliver of jerky. You eat slowly, watching the sky turn orange, then deep blue. Your fire crackles. The cabin looms behind you like a giant wooden tombstone. But tonight, it doesn't feel threatening. It feels protective. Later, you climb inside the unfinished shell. No roof, no floor, but the wind doesn't bite as hard. You roll out your makeshift bed, pine boughs under a deer-hide blanket, and rest your head on a folded coat. The stars peek through the gaps. You listen. No creaking, no shifting. The cabin breathes with you. You drift off to the sound of distant owls and the whisper of leaves brushing against your outer walls, like the forest reaching out, curious, cautious, maybe even a little impressed. The wind howls at 3 a.m., and something, either a raccoon or a demon, claws at the edge of your firewood pile. You wake instantly, not because you're brave, but because your bladder is screaming and your dreams involved snakes that could unlock doors. You lie there for a moment, staring up through the open ceiling of your unfinished cabin, watching stars blink behind a curtain of low clouds. You feel mostly safe. The walls are high now, strong. You can hear the wind swirl around the structure, looking for gaps to slip through. It finds a few, of course, between the logs under the base wherever your precision chinking hasn't started yet. But for the most part, you're sheltered. Sort of. It's finally time to tackle something you've been avoiding cutting proper openings. Namely, a door, and deep breath, a window. Maybe. You've danced around this moment long enough. Your wall is 8 logs high now, too tall to keep vaulting over like an Olympic hopeful. You've been stepping in and out of your future cabin like a very determined burglar, and your knees are threatening unionization. So after breakfast, boiled roots and more bark tea. Yum, you sharpen your hatchet, draw a rough rectangle on the front wall, and take a deep breath. It's door time. You score the outline with your axe blade, marking a 5-foot-high, 2-foot-wide rectangle, not fancy, just functional. You eye it carefully, then get to work. The first few blows are satisfying. The logs are thick, yes, but now that they're horizontal and fixed in place, your cuts matter. You work with the grain carving downward, removing wood a chunk at a time. A groove forms. You cut carefully around the corners, muttering little prayers that the wall doesn't sag the moment you open it up. It's the frontier equivalent of defusing a bomb. You wedge braces on either side, tapping in vertical supports around the doorframe with stones and muscle. It's not elegant, but it'll keep gravity from reminding you who's boss. Mainstream fact break. Many early cabins didn't start with doors. Settlers used blankets or animal hides until they could build a solid wooden slab, often made from split logs or puncheon boards, thick planks flattened with an adze. Hinges were wooden pins, leather straps, or iron if they were very lucky. You finally carve through the bottom log. The door pops free with a rough crack, revealing a neat, if narrow, exit. You step back. You have a doorway now. It's a weirdly emotional moment. You've officially given your home an entrance, which means it's not just a box. It's a place. And now comes the big question, do you dare make a window? You sit down on your rock stool and weigh the pros and cons. Pro light, ventilation, possibly seeing things before they eat you. Con holes in walls, ills weak points, cold, animals, drafts, more things to build. Also, you're working alone. A window is one more place you'll have to defend if things get bitey. But you decide to risk it. Just one, a small one, maybe a foot across, high on the back wall. You mark it out, whispering apologies to the perfectly good log you're about to cut into. Then you start chipping, carefully, slowly. This time you angle the edges inwards, a narrow slit outside, wider inside, creating a kind of primitive funnel. Better for protection, plus it just looks cooler. Quirky tidbit. Some early cabins used mica or oiled parchment for windows, clearish materials that let in light, but blocked wind. Glass. That was a rare treasure usually brought from distant towns and installed only if nothing else worked, or if someone married well. Your window turns out better than expected. It lets in light, frames the woods like a painting, and gives you a clear view of the clearing behind the cabin, a place where hopefully you'll plant something one day that doesn't bite. You stare through it for a long moment, then go outside and look in. The structure is slowly transforming, logs and lines and carved openings, now beginning to resemble something human. You dig a shallow pit just outside the door for firewood storage, cover it with bark and branches. You want to keep your supply dry, especially with the fall rains coming. You already feel the air shifting, cooler morning's wind with teeth. Back inside, you line the door frame with thick branches and clay, packing it tightly to create a kind of seal. It's not pretty, but it'll block most of the breeze. You test the opening again. Step in, step out. No more leaping, no more acrobatics. Just walking into your house like a proper semi-civilized human being. It's deeply satisfying. You even start planning a real door. You split one of the smaller logs, flatten the interior face using your axe like a draw knife, and begin lashing pieces together with rope and rawhide. The result, a slab that's only mildly crooked. You hang it with 2 forked pegs and a stubborn hinge made from bent sapling wood. It squeals like a tortured goose, but it opens, and it closes, mostly. And with that, you've created your own front door. Historians still argue whether early cabins had hinged doors from day one, or just leaned wooden slabs or hides over the entrance. Some suggest that many frontier doors weren't doors at all, but sliding panels or even ladders pulled up at night for safety, like wooden drawbridges. Very inconvenient drawbridges. You sit just inside the doorway as the sun sets. The air outside is growing cold, but inside it holds a little warmth. You light a fire in the center of the dirt floor, no chimney yet, just a crude ring of rocks. The smoke curls up, then sideways, then very rudely into your face. Ventilation, another future you problem. But for now, the walls glow faint orange. Shadows ripple across the wood. You sit with your back to the wall, your hat over your eyes, the door closed against the night. And for the first time, it actually feels like a place where someone might live. You fall asleep with one eye open, a knife near your hand, and the soft sound of wind testing your newly cut openings. The cabin doesn't budge. Not tonight. The cabin's doorway creaks in the morning breeze, a long, low whine like a tired ghost. And for a moment you wonder if you dreamt the whole thing. But then you sit up and slam your elbow against a log wall. No dream, just real pain. Today the time has come to face what may be the most dangerous frontier construction feat, yet raising the roof. Right now your cabin is a glorified wooden shoebox with an attitude problem. Walls 8 logs high, notched and braced, but with nothing overhead but sky. And while sleeping under stars sounds poetic, you've now endured one too many cold nights, damp mornings, and raccoons with a talent for climbing. It's time to close the lid on this pine-scented coffin of yours. First, you map out the structure. You need a ridgepole, a long, heavy log that'll run down the center of the cabin, resting on both front and back walls. It'll support the rafters and ultimately the roofing material. You measure the distance about 12 feet. That's a long log. And worse, it needs to be straight. Not Snake Mike or Wobbly James. You need Ridgepole Rachel. Strong, centered, no nonsense. You search through your leftover pile. There she is. 12 feet, minimal, taper, dry, dense, straight enough to draw a compass line down her spine. Perfect. Now comes the problem physics. Lifting ridgepole Rachel alone is ambitious. You fashion 2 vertical posts, forked saplings lashed to the inside corners of your walls. These will catch the ends of the ridgepole and hold it aloft. You lash crossbeams between the forks, making a kind of scaffold. The whole thing wobbles like a drunk moose. You stabilize the base with rocks, add braces, pray a little. Then you begin the haul. You hoist the ridgepole one end at a time, up the ramp, onto the wall, then higher onto the post's fork. The other end follows. You grunt sweat, and at one point genuinely consider building a shrine to gravity if it lets you survive. Finally, it clicks into place. A deep, clean thunk. You step back. Your cabin now has a spine. Mainstream fact break: frontier builders often used gable roofs with a ridgepole and paired rafters. It was the simplest, most efficient way to shed water and snow, and allowed for a loft space either for sleeping storage or hiding from bears. Roofs were steep enough to prevent collapse, but shallow enough to build without scaffolding. In theory. Now the rafters. You cut 6 smaller poles, each about 6 feet long, straight as you can find. You notch one end of each to sit on the ridgepole and the other to rest on the cabin walls. Then you haul them up one by one and wedge them into place like ribs. The cabin starts to resemble an overturned boat. It's precarious work. You straddle the wall, balancing with one hand, guiding rafters with the other. There's no safety line, just your increasingly sore thighs and the silent judgment of passing birds. One wrong move, and it's a 10-foot drop onto Rock's tools and your self-respect. Quirky tidbit. Some old-world traditions warned builders never to look directly at the ridgepole while raising it. Bad luck, they said. Others insisted you had to spit on your hand first or nail a coin under the beam for good fortune. You spit just in case. No coin, though. You're not made of silver. The rafters go up in pairs. Once they're up, you lash crossbeams between them, creating a primitive skeleton of triangles. It's not pretty, but it'll hold weight. You test it carefully. 1 foot on the rafter, slight bounce. No creak. So far, so good. Then comes the covering. You have choices. Bark slabs heavy, hard to find. Wooden shingles take forever to shape. Sapling poles and thatch fast but leaky. Or the classic frontier cheat: split logs. You choose split logs. You cut several mid-size pine trunks and cleave them with your axe, one slow swing at a time. The wood splits unevenly, some clean, some jagged, but you stack the flattest ones like makeshift tiles. Historians still argue whether split log roofs were ever truly watertight. Many claim they worked fine with enough pitch and chinking. Others say they leaked like gossip in a church pew. Either way, you've got limited options and fewer daylight hours. You begin laying the half logs across the rafters, concave side down. They overlap like scales angled to shed water down and away. You wedge moss and clay between gaps, reinforcing with small branches. It's tedious, painfully slow. Your fingers ache from gripping rough bark. Your shoulders threaten mutiny, but bit by bit the roof takes shape. By dusk, half of it is covered. You perch on the ridge, eating cold bread and sipping creek water, watching the forest below glow gold with sunset. The air feels different up here, higher, lighter, like you've earned the right to sit above the trees. You hammer a final wedge into place and climb down, muscles trembling. The cabin looks real. With the roof skeleton finished and half covered, it casts an actual shadow on the ground. You step inside, ducking under the rafter arch. It's darker now, quieter, a real interior. You light a fire in the center ring. The smoke rises to the open peak, no chimney yet, but you can see where it'll go. The rafters above flicker orange. You're inside something you built, something holding its shape against time and wind. It's overwhelming, and somehow peaceful. You stretch out under the high beams, staring up through the still open roof. The stars blink in. You see shapes in the rafters, triangles, X's, crude geometry carved in haste and held together with bark willpower and blisters. And for a moment, just a moment, you forget how tired you are. Because above you, rising into the night sky, is the roof of your very own world. Smoke curls sideways through the cabin, like a lazy ghost with no sense of direction. You sit cross-legged beside your fire, blinking through the haze, realizing somewhat dramatically that you're being slowly smoked to death by your own success. The roof works. Too well, actually. It traps the warmth, sure, but also everything else, including that fine pine-scented smoke currently stinging your eyeballs and making your stew taste like campfire regret. It's time. Today you build a chimney. Now, to be clear, the term chimney might conjure images of neat brick towers with curling plumes and neatly stacked firewood nearby. That's adorable. You don't have bricks. You don't have mortar. You barely have the will to stand. But what you do have is a pile of rocks, some river clay, and a vague, dangerous plan. First, you drag flat stones from the creek bed, each one cold, damp, and suspiciously heavy. You stack them loosely in a square outside the back corner of the cabin, forming a crude box. You're going for function here, not elegance. Besides, this thing isn't meant to impress, it's meant to not kill you. You dig a shallow pit at the base, your future hearth. Then you begin layering the stones upward, leaving a small vent space at the back where smoke can funnel out. You daub each layer with wet clay mixed with ashes, moss, and the finely ground remains of your last attempt at cooking. Mainstream fact break. Early chimneys were often cat and clay types, sticks woven into a frame like wattle, then plastered with clay. These were highly flammable but quick to build. More permanent solutions came later with stone or mud brick, often relying on the cabin's existing structure to support the weight. You're going for stone. Mostly because the idea of weaving sticks over fire seems like something you'd read on your own future tombstone. The process is slow, painfully so. Each stone must be tested for fit, shaped with your hatchet leveled with smaller rocks. Your hands are quickly caked in mud and soot. Your back feels like someone's been using it as an anvil. But still, the chimney grows stone by stubborn stone. You reinforce the base with logs lashed horizontally, creating a frame for the chimney to lean into. You wedge clay between each gap, smoothing it with your fingers. It hardens in the afternoon sun like ancient concrete. By midday, the base chimney stack is 3 feet high. Quirky tidbit. Some frontier folk placed iron kettles or old pans directly into the chimney wall during construction, either as crude ovens or bizarrely to trap smoke spirits inside. One journal even mentioned a horseshoe embedded in the flue to confuse the devil. You, however, settle for jamming an old tin cup into the clay. Not quite as mystical, but hey, maybe the devil hates lukewarm coffee. Now comes the interior work. You tear apart the old fire ring and dig a new hearth base just inside the rear wall. Flat stones line the bottom. You use a long, wide rock as a kind of fire shelf, sloping it slightly to channel the smoke toward the back vent. You test it. Build a small fire. The smoke rises, hits the back wall, and miracle of miracles follows the vent. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but it goes up and out, not back into your face. You laugh, loudly. Smoke gets in your mouth. Historians still argue whether early chimneys were built for efficiency or just because nobody wanted to smell like meat jerky for the rest of their lives. Some evidence suggests cabins went months before chimneys were added, relying on roof gaps or open fires. Others argue a chimney was the first thing added after walls, especially in colder climates, where winters came in swinging. Your climate doesn't care about your opinion. The wind picks up as if to say, build it faster. So you keep going. You extend the stack up the cabin's back wall, layering more stone and clay. Eventually, it climbs just past the roofline. You leave a wide opening at the top, angled slightly to the east, so prevailing winds won't blow back down into your stew pot. It looks ridiculous. Crooked, smudged. More sculpture than chimney. But when you light the next fire, the smoke rises and disappears. Gone. Up. Out. You watch the flames dance. The interior stays relatively clear. Warmth spreads without choking you. The cabin smells like earth and wood instead of regret. It's working. You sit by the fire as dusk settles. The light glows against the walls, casting long, flickering shadows. You stare at the chimney, tracing the smoke as it threads upward into the pink sky. Inside, you build a shelf near the fire, just a plank wedged between two logs. It holds your tin cup, your knife, and a very small pile of pine cones you've decided are decorative. Above the hearth, you hammer in 2 pegs for drying wet clothes. You hang your shirt, which smells like something that should be exercised, and watch it steam in the heat. And then suddenly rain. A soft patter at first, then heavier. You rush outside and look up. The half of the roof you covered holding beautifully. The other half leaking like a stabbed bucket. You laugh again, this time quietly, like someone who's truly deeply exhausted. But still, the fire burns. The smoke rises. The cabin holds. You crawl into bed that night with damp feet, dry shoulders, and the weird, undeniable comfort of having tamed a small piece of chaos. Just a corner. Just a shelter. But it's yours. As the rain taps against the logs, you stare up at the half roof and imagine shingles. A loft. Maybe a chimney cap made from stone and stubbornness. And for the first time since arriving here, the smoke no longer follows you into sleep. You wake with a sore back, a soggy blanket, and a half-chewed pine cone under your hip. It's not exactly 5-star living, but hey, the fire's still smoldering, the roof hasn't collapsed, and only one corner of the cabin smells like wet raccoon. In frontier terms, you're thriving. But today is no small task. Today, you're building something that no wilderness man can live long without a floor. Right now, your cabin floor is just dirt. Technically, mud. Well, technically a blend of packed soil, soot, pine needles, rainwater, and the ghost of every bug that's ever walked through. It's been rustic, sure. But with rain now sneaking in, the ground's turned into a squishy mess that sticks to your boots like guilt. And your bed. You've been sleeping on a pile of pine boughs that now smell like a decaying Christmas tree in a crypt. Enough's enough. So you throw back your damp blankets, stomp your numb feet into your boots, and get to it. First, you level the ground inside the cabin. This sounds simple. It is not. You dig down with a flat stick, scraping away roots and high spots. Then you use a split board like a giant butter knife to shave the dirt into submission. You find 2 grubs the size of thumbs, 1 buried animal skull, and a rock so stubborn you name it. Sir Stubblestone, and build around it rather than admit defeat. Once the surface is flattish, you tamp it down by jumping on it repeatedly. If anyone were watching, you'd look like a very determined toddler trying to crush a birthday cake. Mainstream fact break. Many early cabins had no floor for the first several months, just packed earth. Floors were added later, using either puncheon planks, split logs with one flat side, or for the fancier folk sawn boards. Punchin was more common. It required no sawmill, just sweat and blisters. You've got no sawmill, but you do have sweat and blisters in spades. So punchin it is. You walk the woods choosing straight pine logs around 6 to 8 inches in diameter. You fell 5 of them by mid-morning, each one full of sap and bad attitude. You drag them back, pile them beside the cabin, and begin the long process of splitting. You use your axe like a wedge, hammering it with a mallet you made from an earlier mistake. The log cracks, splinters. Eventually it yields. You flip one half over and begin shaving the interior side flat. It's sort of flat. If you squint, in low light, from a distance. You repeat the process, over and over. Each split log becomes a plank, thick, heavy, misshapen. But once you start laying them side by side across the dirt, they look like something civilized. You don't nail them down, no nails. Instead, you notch the ends and set them into a shallow groove you've dug along the perimeter wall. They hold. Kind of. By early afternoon, a third of your floor is in place. You test it, step gingerly on the planks. They creak. A few rock slightly. One tries to bounce. You wedge bark shims underneath and pretend you don't see the gap. It's starting to look like an actual room. You sit down on your new floor back against the wall and take a moment to admire your handiwork. And then, because frontier life has a very specific sense of humor, you sneeze. And that's when the draft hits you. Right through the floor. Apparently there are still air gaps between your punchin planks and the ground. Cold nose-level gaps that channel chilled wind from outside right through your ankles. Quirky tidbit, some settlers layered dried leaves, moss, or even animal pelts under their floors to help with insulation. One particularly creative journal mentions using woven grass mats stuffed with goose feathers. You stare at a dead squirrel outside and contemplate your options. Eventually, you gather armfuls of dried moss pine needles and crumbling leaves. You stuff them between the punchin boards, layering them like lasagna insulation. It's messy. It smells earthy. But it helps. By dusk, you've floored half the cabin. That's enough for one night. You move your sleeping gear onto the wooden half, careful not to think about the bugs underneath. You light your fire, now burning cleanly with smoke, curling obediently up the chimney. You feel safe. Historians still argue whether punchin floors were more comfortable or just marginally better than dirt. Some say the boards warped quickly and grew mold. Others insist a wooden floor was the mark of stability, a line between surviving and settling. You sit on yours with a bowl of broth, heavy on water, light on flavor, staring at the walls lit orange by firelight. The logs above glow faintly. The roof creaks. The door moans. But the floor beneath you stays solid. You tap your foot. It doesn't sink. That's progress. You add a small touch, a rug of woven grass tied into place with twine and hope. It cushions your knees, keeps your tin plate from sliding, and gives you the strange, powerful illusion of comfort. And tonight, when you lie down, no mud, no squirming things under your spine, no pine needles in your ear. Just you, your axe, the occasional mouse in the rafters, and the reassuring solidity of a floor you fought to build. You wake up warm, not exactly cozy, but undeniably warmer than usual. And for once, your hip isn't bruised by a root, a rock, or a rogue beetle masquerading as a mattress accessory. You sit up slowly, expecting your breath to fog in the morning air, but it doesn't. Why? Because the wind stayed outside. Your floor held. Your chimney pulled smoke out instead of blowing it in. And most incredibly, the cabin didn't turn into a freezer overnight. The difference is small, but it's real. You can feel it in your fingertips, still stiff but not numb, which means today's the day. Time to seal the gaps. Up to this point, the walls of your cabin have had what one might generously call ventilation. Between each log, no matter how tight your notching, are small gaps, tiny channels where cold air, rain bugs, and especially regret sneak through. What you need now is chinking. Mainstream fact break: chinking is the process of sealing the gaps between logs with a mix of clay, mud, moss, straw, or whatever else could be found. The goal wasn't perfection, it was insulation. Some homes were re-chinked every year as the materials settled or crumbled. You step outside and take a good hard look at your handiwork. Your walls look strong, but up close they resemble a toddler's attempt at building with Lincoln logs. Gaps everywhere, some the width of a finger, one wide enough to see a squirrel's nose poking through. You name him Kevin and politely ask him to vacate. Chinking it is. First you need material. You've got clay from the riverbank, dried moss from the shady side of trees, dead grass from around the clearing, pine needles, a big stick for mixing, and a generous lack of dignity. You build a mixing pit, a shallow bowl in the dirt. Then you dump in clay, water, moss, and handfuls of whatever else seems sticky and not immediately alive. You stir with the stick, creating a lumpy, fibrous paste that looks like oatmeal if oatmeal was sentient and hated you. You test it on a wall seam. Slap, smear, pack. It sticks, barely. You scrape off the excess wedge, more moss in the larger gaps, and press the clay mix around it like you're icing a very ugly cake. It's cold. It's squishy. It works. Quirky tidbit: some settlers mixed animal hair or even dried dung into their chinking for extra binding power. Ancient Egyptian homes used crocodile dung as mortar. You don't have crocodiles, but you do have mystery scat in the woods. You politely decline. You spend the entire morning on one wall. Every gap must be filled. Some are high up, requiring your rickety ladder made from 2 saplings lashed with rawhide. It creaks in protest but holds. Slap, press, pack, repeat. As the chinking dries, it changes color, light tan to dusty gray. It cracks in places, so you go back and patch the weak spots. It's a battle against time. The mix hardens quickly, but not evenly. You mutter at it like a frustrated chef with too much batter and no pan. By midday, your hands are coated in muck. Your shirt is streaked with clay. There's moss in your boots and your left ear itches suspiciously. But one wall is done, sealed, closed, and the difference is immediate. You step inside and feel the air shift. The wind, once constant, is now a whisper. The space feels contained. You light a small fire and watch the smoke rise. No backdraft, no swirling air. The warmth holds, it stays in. Historians still argue how often settlers re-chinked their cabins. Some say every year, others insist proper chinking lasted longer. The truth: it likely depended on materials, weather, and just how badly a family wanted to avoid freezing solid. You move to the next wall. More slapping, more pressing, more arguing with clay that won't behave. One chunk falls out mid-pack and lands square in your open boot. You take a moment, stare into the middle distance, then carry on. By late afternoon, the entire structure is sealed. The gaps are gone. You step outside and admire it, your crooked, moss-stuffed, clay-splattered fortress. It's not pretty, but it's solid. The seams are rough, uneven in some places, bulging like the logs are about to sneeze, but nothing gets through. No air, no light, no Kevin. You add one final touch, an overhang above the window fashioned from bark slabs and pinned with pegs. It's meant to shield the chinking from direct rain, or at least confuse it enough to give you a few dry weeks. Inside, the difference is stunning. The space is warm, still. You can hear your own breath again. The fire crackles contained. The smoke obeys the chimney. The light dances on clay-lined logs, and a floor that, for all its creaking, doesn't squish anymore. You build a seat near the hearth, just a log turned on its side. You sit, lean back, let your arms droop, and you listen. No breeze, no drip, no scratching of curious forest creatures testing your structural integrity. You feel safe. Not forever, not completely, but safe enough to sleep with both eyes closed. Tonight you cook over the fire. Real cooking, not just jerky warmed by pity. You roast some wild roots, add a few green things you're reasonably sure won't kill you. The food tastes better inside, hotter, quieter, like it belongs. And for the first time since arriving, you eat sitting up, at a real fire, inside real walls. It's not home yet, but it's close. And as you lie down in your blanket nest on the raised floor, the fire low, the wind silent, and the gaps sealed tight, you don't even notice the cold. You wake up in the middle of the night, convinced your cabin is haunted. Something creaked, not like a squirrel on the roof or a breeze in the eaves, but a deep groaning sound, wood settling, shifting, or possibly plotting your demise. You lie still, staring into the dim glow of dying embers, and wait. Nothing. No whispering logs, no cursed spirits, no wild animal critiquing your craftsmanship. Just the usual one man, one half-finished home and no furniture whatsoever, which, by the way, is starting to wear thin. You've eaten every meal crouched like a medieval peasant, sorted tools by somewhere near the fire or in that suspicious corner, and spent too many hours sitting on stumps that were never meant to be chairs. Today, you fix that. Today, you invent frontier furniture. Mainstream fact break. Early settlers typically built their own furnishings, tables, benches, beds, shelves from leftover logs or split boards. Store-bought pieces were rare luxuries, often carted hundreds of miles or brought from the east. A rough table and a couple stools were usually among the first essentials made after the roof went up. You start with the bed, not because you're fancy, but because your back has issued a formal protest. You want it off the floor, away from cold drafts, damp boards, and whatever that thing was crawling over your ankle at 2 a.m. You select 4 small logs, each about 2 feet long, and sharpen their ends. These are your corner posts. You hammer them into the floor near the back wall. Then you notch and lash together 2 long beams to form the frame. Your hammer is a rock. Your nails are well still non-existent. You use rawhide-soaked bark cordage and bitter determination. The result: a rectangular platform that only wobbles when you really breathe. Progress. Next comes the slats. You split thin pine poles, lay them across the frame, and wedge them in place. Then you stack pine boughs, dried grass, and a spare hide across the top. You lie down, and oh, it's still firm, still uneven, but it's not the floor. You feel practically royal. Then onto the table. You pick the flattest slab of pine from your scrap pile, still curved, but you can work with it. You shave the underside smoothish with your axe, then carve 4 legs from stout branches. You notch the top and jam the legs into place, then wedge them tighter with dried moss and pine shims. It stands, slightly slanted, deeply confused about its purpose, but it stands. Quirky tidbit: some pioneer tables were made from tree stumps, just planed flat and dragged into place. Others used barrels or crates. Chairs were rare. Most families used backless benches or cross-legged stools. Comfort was, let's say, optional. You craft a stool next. 1 thick round of wood, 3 legs angled outward, jammed and wedged into holes you burned with a hot iron rod. It's ugly, unstable. You love it immediately. By mid-afternoon, the interior of your cabin is beginning to look like something. Bed, table, stool, a narrow shelf carved from a split log and pegged to the wall with sharpened sticks. You line up your tools there, axe, mallet, fire striker. You add your tin cup, a single spoon you carved on day 4, still vaguely spoon-like, and a tiny pile of pebbles you've started collecting, for no reason other than they're smooth and feel nice in your hand. The place is becoming yours, and that's when the cabin decides to mock you. You sit on the stool, the leg gives. You fall sideways, smack your elbow on the table, which also wobbles, and watch your tin cup roll off the shelf, bounce once, and settle inside your unfinished chimney with a metallic thud. Perfect. You sit in the dirt, rubbing your arm and laughing, because that's frontier life in a nutshell. Build, fall, swear, patch, repeat. You fix the stool leg with a sturdier peg, reinforce the table with diagonal braces. You even tie the cup to the shelf with twine. Take that gravity. Later, you add a peg rail along one wall, just a row of sharpened sticks jammed into drilled holes. You hang your coat, your satchel, a strip of dried meat you pretend is jerky, but is probably just sadness in food form. And finally, because you're starting to feel dangerously domestic, you craft a lantern shelf above the fire. It's nothing more than a wedge of bark nailed between 2 pegs, but you place a chunk of pine resin and a rag-wrapped stick there. Your first real light source. You light it. The cabin glows, soft, flickering, golden. Everything inside the rough bed, crooked table, wonky shelf, and half-stable stool takes on a kind of charm in the firelight. The imperfections blur. The shadows deepen. The place feels less like a box made of logs and more like a room. Historians still argue whether frontier men actually cared about comfort or if survival alone occupied every waking moment. Some journals mention handmade furniture with care and detail, others just sleeping on bark mats for years. The reality was probably somewhere between misery and ingenuity. You stretch your legs under the table and lean back against the wall. The fire crackles. The stool holds this time. Your cup is upright, and your new shelf hasn't collapsed. You have furniture. Furniture you built. Furniture that functions. And tonight, when you eat, no more crouching by the fire. No more using a stump as a plate. You sit at your table, on your stool, in your cabin. It may wobble, it may creak, but it's real, and it's enough. There's a sound, not the usual creak of cooling wood or the comforting pop of pine in the fire, or even the tiny rustle of a mouse contemplating if your leftovers are worth the risk. No, this sound is sharper, closer, scratching, under the floor. You freeze. You were mid-snore cheek, pressed against your pine bough pillow, when the noise pulled you up from dreams of eating hot stew with a spoon that didn't splinter. Now you're sitting in the dark heart, thudding, staring at the floor. There it is again. Scritch, scratch, pause. You slowly reach for your axe, because tonight the topic isn't logs or notches or even sad furniture. No. Tonight is about critters, creaks, and creeping dread. You rise silently, moving across the cabin in your socks. The fire's down to embers, casting faint shadows that stretch and twitch with every movement. The scratching continues. It's not frantic, just persistent. You kneel, press your ear to the floor. There, right beneath your bed, something living, something digging. Mouse rat. A family of chipmunks starting their own settlement. You lift the floor plank. Nothing. Then a flash. A blur of fur vanishes into the dark gap under your floor where cold air and shadows dwell. You slam the plank back down, heart racing. Okay, so your cabin is occupied. Mainstream fact break. Early cabins were often built with dirt floors for months, and once flooring was added, it created the perfect habitat for mice, snakes, and insects. Some settlers deliberately raised floors off the ground, using stone piers or dugout cellars to help with airflow and pest control. Others just accepted the company. You're not that accepting. So the next day you start fortifying. First, you stuff moss and clay between the floor gaps, every edge, every knothole. Then you dig around the cabin's base, searching for burrows. You find one small but active. You block it with stones. Then another under the back corner where your chimney stack leaks just enough warmth to invite squatters. You shove bark, more moss, and a generous amount of muttered curses into every opening. And then you decide to make a trap. Nothing complicated. Just a crude box with a drop door rigged with twine and a piece of meat. You set it by the hearth. Wait. No movement. So you go about your day, and that's when you realize the creaking is getting worse. Not just floorboards, the walls now, especially at night. Long, slow groans as the logs settle, the weight above shifting. You lie awake listening, trying to decide if it's structural or supernatural. Quirky tidbit. Some settlers carved protective symbols into their logs, pentacles, stars, runes, believing they'd ward off forest spirits or creatures that came in the night. Others hung small bones or feathers above doorways just in case. You stare at the top beam above your door and wonder if it's time to get weird. You carve a small symbol anyway, just a spiral, for balance, for luck, for maybe scaring off that thing under your bed. You also add a smoke shelf in the rafters just above the fire under the roof peak, a flat board wedged into place. It helps the chimney draw better, but also lets you store things out of reach like food, and maybe your boots. Because speaking of critters, that night you wake to chewing. Something is biting into your bed leg. You sit up so fast you whack your head on the rafter. Then you drop off the bed, lift it up, and catch them in the act. Two small mice, bold as soldiers, gnawing on your pine frame like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. They freeze. You freeze. Everyone stares. Then they vanish, one darting into a floorboard gap, the other leaping into your pack and disappearing. You spend the next hour chasing a mouse around your cabin with a broom you made from tied twigs. It escapes. You collapse. The next morning, you hang your food from the ceiling. You double-check every corner. You sleep with one eye open. But then comes the creep. Not a sound, not a scratch, but a sense. A cold chill down your back. A feeling of being watched. Something ancient in the way the fire dims, or how the light plays across the chinked clay. You catch yourself glancing at shadows, pausing at the door before stepping out. It's nonsense, you tell yourself. Just the isolation, the dark, the wind whispering things it shouldn't. But still, you build a second latch for your door. A crossbeam that locks from the inside. You wedge sticks in the lower floor gaps. You carve more spirals into the beams. One above the window, one near the hearth, one quietly on the underside of your bed. Because historians still argue whether the frontier drove men mad from solitude, or whether there really was something out there in the woods, watching, waiting, listening. Either way, you're not taking chances. Later, you hear it again. The creak, not from the floor, not from the roof, from beneath the cabin. You don't look, you just sit by the fire, eyes on the flames, a hand on your axe, and the carved spirals glowing faintly in the flickering light. The mice are gone, but something else might not be. You sleep anyway, because tired beats scared, and your cabin creaks like it's breathing. You wake up to the sound of sloshing, not the peaceful trickle of a creek, not the gentle drip of morning dew from a branch, no. This is the full-bodied, heavy slurp, slosh, slap of a bucket tumbling over inside your cabin, followed by the unmistakable splash of cold water hitting your only dry floorboard. You open your eyes slowly. Your water bucket, your precious lugget from the creek like a mule bucket, is tipped over. A small puddle is spreading across the puncheon floor like it's thinking of forming a lake. And your hide blanket already soaking up the edges. Welcome to the reality of water fire and the privy situation. Let's start with the first essential frontier truth. No one brings up the bathroom until it's a problem. And oh, it's a problem now. But first, the water situation. Mainstream fact break: most early cabins were built near some form of water, usually a creek spring or hand-dug well. Daily hauling was just part of survival. Buckets were made of wood, with metal hoops, or carved from hollowed logs. Water had to be boiled, filtered through cloth, or prayed over extensively if you didn't want a surprise stomach evacuation at midnight. You, of course, are relying on a nearby stream, just downhill. Clear, cold, and scenic until you remember that upstream could be literally anything. Deer, rotting logs, that one fox that keeps watching you while you wash your socks. So you decide time to build a proper water station. You dig a hole just inside the cabin door, line it with flat stones, and place your primary bucket inside it. So if it tips again, it leaks into the hole, not all over your bed. Then you build a second stand just outside a flat stump where your wash bucket sits. You carve a dipper out of pine after 3 failed attempts that look like spoons from a fever dream and attach it to the rim with a bit of twine. But still hauling water every day is a pain. You try carrying 2 buckets at once. You nearly fall twice, spill one and splash yourself in the face with the other. You debate training a raccoon, then fire. The hearth is working better now. The smoke shelf and clay chimney draw well, and the interior stays warm. But feeding the fire requires constant attention. You burn through wood fast, especially now that nights are colder, and your stockpile shrinking. So you dedicate the next day to firewood duty. You cut split stack. You build a small wood crib outside the cabin, just 2 logs wide, 2 logs high, notched together like a miniature version of your house. You cover it with bark slabs and weigh them down with stones. Inside, pine, oak, hickory, some green, some dry. Enough for maybe a week if you don't get greedy. And now to the final frontier of human suffering. The privy situation. You've been putting it off. You've gone behind trees, dug small cat holes, whispered apologies to the forest. But now that the ground is freezing in the mornings and your knees pop every time you squat, it's time for a real solution. So you pick a spot 50 feet from the cabin, downhill from the creek, tucked behind a stand of trees. You dig a pit. 2 feet deep, 1 foot wide, long enough to stand over. You line the edges with rocks. You build 2 upright posts, lash a crossbeam between them, and carve a flat plank to sit across the top. You test it once. It holds. You name it the throne. Quirky tidbit. Early settlers called them necessaries, little houses, or simply out back. Lime or ashes were sprinkled into the pit to control the smell. Fancier privies had walls. Yours has a view. You make a small screen from branches lashed together, then plant 2 fast-growing saplings near it for future coverage. You even carve a little sign with a stick figure sitting proudly. You hang it from a twig. You feel like a king, Back at the cabin, you wash your hands twice with sand and cold water. It's not soap, but it'll do. And then it starts to rain. You rush to cover the woodpile, shut the cabin door, and check for leaks. Your roof, half-barked, half-split logs, partially chinked, is holding. But water still drips in small, strategic places. You place bark buckets under the leaks and call it passive collection. Historians still argue whether frontier settlers truly separated living space from waste space, or if necessity forced them into corner solutions. Some archaeological digs suggest surprisingly well-built outhouses. Others point to shallow trenches. The line between survival and sanitation was often one gust of wind away. You add finishing touches to your water and fire system. A kindling basket, actually just a hollow log. A dry bark tinderbox near the hearth. A pole outside with your bucket hook tied to it so you're not digging in the mud every morning. By the next evening, you're settled again. Inside, warm, dry, smelling faintly of pine smoke and wet boots. Outside, a neat woodpile, a hidden privy, and a clean water dipper. It's not civilization, not exactly, but it's your version of it. And when you go out at midnight under a cloudy sky, guided only by the faint glow of embers through the cabin window, and sit down at your little throne in the woods, you feel absurdly content. It's cold, you're alone, and a squirrel is watching you like it's judging your technique. But it's functional. And when you walk back to your cabin, water fetched, fire steady, and bed dry, you realize the wilderness may still be wild, but you've finally earned the right to call it inconvenient. The wind has teeth now. Not the playful autumn breezes of a week ago, no. This is full-on, straight from the north, crack-your-knuckles kind of cold. You wake to frost, tracing delicate spiderweb lines across your window opening, and the water in your clay wash bowl frozen solid. Welcome to first snow, first panic. You step outside, boots crunching over a thin crust of white. It's not much, just a dusting, but it's enough to coat the roof silver, the trees, and whisper an ancient truth in your ear. You're almost out of time. The cabin's walls are strong, the roof mostly sealed, the floor raised. But cold doesn't care about your log count or your blisters. It finds the cracks. It sinks through wood. It waits. You shiver, not entirely from the air. Mainstream fact break. The first snowfall was often a pivotal moment for frontier settlers. It marked the shift from build fast to survive faster. Cabins were often unfinished. When snow hit roofs, open chimneys, leaking floors, still dirt. The scramble to insulate store food and prepare firewood became the defining activity of the season. You go back inside and begin your morning ritual, stoke the fire, check the roof for leaks. Look for new critter holes, you find one. Kevin's back. Whisper threats at Kevin, drink warm water, and pretend it's broth. The chinking you slapped between logs last week is holding for now. But frost has begun to form in the deepest seams. You patch a few soft spots with more clay, reheating the mix by the fire until it's pliable again. You add a second layer around the window, this time packing it with pine resin, moss, and crushed charcoal. Sticky, but more weatherproof. You even consider blocking the window entirely just for warmth. But you can't quite bring yourself to shut out that tiny square of sky. Then comes the real horror wood inventory. You step outside and stare at your neat little crib. 5 rows, bone dry. You do some quick mental math. This won't last. 2 weeks maybe if you ration. 1 if it stays windy. Less if it really snows. So you do what frontier folk have always done when panic sets in. You cut more wood. All day. Every minute of sunlight. You return to the tree line and start felling dead-standing pine. Lighter burns faster, but easier to haul. You work fast. You split faster. By evening, your hands are trembling and your arms feel like they've been steamrolled. But you've added 2 more rows to the stack. You try to eat dinner something warm at least. Stewed bark, questionable roots, and one of those maybe potatoes you unearthed near the privy path. It tastes like a dare. You finish it anyway. That night you sleep in your full coat. Fire low, cabin sealed, and still, the cold creeps in. Quirky tidbit. Some frontier families hung quilts on the inside of their walls as makeshift insulation. Others built inner walls from hides, straw bales, or stacked corn husks. One journal even mentioned lining the interior with woven rabbit skins sewn into curtains. You stare at your one spare hide and wonder if Kevin would mind contributing his. The next morning brings snow. Real snow. 6 inches heavy wet, dragging down tree limbs and frosting your roof like a confection made by a vengeful baker. You barely get the door open, snow's blown against it, packed into every crevice. You shovel with a bark slab until your fingers go numb. And now your boots are wet. You sit by the fire, steaming in every sense of the word, and decide enough. You build a drying rack, just 2 poles wedged above the fire tied together with rawhide. You hang your socks, your gloves, your boots. The steam rises, thick and fragrant. Your cabin now smells like smoked leather and damp frustration. Historians still argue how well frontier cabins handled winter. Some accounts describe warm, sealed homes tight as ships. Others mention weeks spent huddled around smoky fires, sleeping in shifts to keep warm and praying the roof would hold. The truth, as always, was probably both. You test the roof at midday, poking with a long stick from the loft you've half finished above your bed. The snow slides off heavy and wet. It thuds to the ground outside with a sound that makes you flinch. One day you think, one heavy storm and this whole thing could cave in. So you build braces, short logs angled under the ridgepole, wedged tight against the floor beams, reinforcing the skeleton. Not pretty, not even, but stronger. You sleep easier that night, listening to snow hit the roof and not fall through it. That's a win. You wake the next morning and can't feel your toes. Panic, no. Just frostbite flirtation. You scramble to the fire, light it with shaking fingers, and press your feet near the flames. They burn, then tingle, then scream. You laugh. A little too hard. And that's when you realize you haven't spoken out loud in 2 days. You cough. Say your name. Say, "Good morning, Kevin." Say, "Please don't let me die this week." Your voice sounds like a stranger's. You eat breakfast standing up, stomping your feet for warmth. You put more wood on the fire. You wipe condensation from the window hole. And then you sit on your stool back to the wall fire at your feet and stare into the flames. And you start planning. Not how to leave, not how to quit, but how to survive. You make a list, mentally. More firewood. Another hide curtain. Fill cracks with ash and pine pitch, sleep with rocks heated by the fire, make a windbreak for the door, maybe. Build a snow shelter outside just in case, because you know now the cabin's strong. But winter is stronger, and the only thing keeping you alive is how fast you can outbuild the cold. You don't sleep well that night. The wind moans through the trees. The roof creaks. Something thumps outside, maybe snow falling from a branch, maybe not. But the fire stays lit, and the walls stay standing. And you're still here. For now. The snow is deeper now, knee-high in places, crusted with a hard shell that crunches like stale bread under your boots. Every step outside is a chore, every movement an energy tax you didn't sign up for. But you're out there anyway, shoveling a narrow path around the cabin, trying to stay one step ahead of being completely snowed in. Then, in the middle of all that white silence, you see something strange, tracks. Not animal, not the erratic hopping of a rabbit or the small claws of a squirrel. These are boot prints, human. You freeze. The tracks loop from the edge of the woods around the back of the cabin and vanish into the tree line. No sound, no voice, just the faint melting trail of someone or something that was watching. And just like that, it's time to talk about trading trust and territorial glares. Until now, you've operated under the assumption that you're alone, which on the frontier is both a luxury and a liability. But you're not. Not really. Somewhere out there over the ridge along the next creek, someone else is scratching out a life just like you, and they might be friendly, or not. Mainstream fact break, frontier settlements were often loosely connected networks of homesteads. Neighbors could be half a day's walk away, and trade was vital for survival. Items like salt sugar powder and coffee became currency. But isolation bred suspicion. Encounters were cautious, often armed. You finish shoveling your path, one eye on the woods. Then, around midday, he shows up. You hear him before you see him crunching snow, then a low call. Hello, the cabin. You step outside, axe in hand, trying to look both casual and intimidating. You mostly look cold. He's bundled in furs, face red from the wind, one hand up in greeting, the other loosely resting on the butt of his rifle. Didn't mean to spook you, he says. You nod once. He's older, maybe 40. Beard like a tangle of moss eyes squinting against the light. He smells faintly of tobacco and wet leather. I'm from East Ridge, he adds. Thought I saw smoke a few days back. Figured I'd see who moved in. You say your name. He gives his Harlan. There's a long silence. Then, because this is how frontier diplomacy works, you invite him in. He stomps the snow from his boots, crouches by the fire, and surveys the cabin. Doesn't say much, but you see him nodding, approving the roof braces, the tight chinking, the small but growing pile of wood by the hearth. Solid build, he says. Better than my first one. Mine fell in before winter proper. You don't ask how he survived that. Instead, you offer him the last of your bark tea and a half-burned hunk of mystery root stew. He accepts both like they're gifts from a king. That's when the real business begins, trade. You list what you have. Some dried meat, pine resin, bark cordage, a few flints, 2 deer hides, one is still a little fresh, a spoon carved with way too much enthusiasm. He has salt, a pouch of coffee, 2 tins of gunpowder, a handful of iron nails, actual nails, and a slab of bacon wrapped in oilcloth. Your stomach actually whimpers. You trade 1 hide and the spoon for a nail and 2 pinches of coffee. It's not a good deal, but it opens the door. The 2 of you sit by the fire, warming hands quietly, negotiating without saying much at all. This is how trust works out here. Slowly, in silence. Over fire. Quirky tidbit. Frontier men often had elaborate systems of nonverbal trade etiquette. A rifle placed beside the fire but not across the lap, friendly. Back against the wall. Wary, sharing tobacco. A peace gesture. Rejecting a cup of tea. Practically a declaration of war. Harlan doesn't overstay. Before nightfall, he stands, tugs his mittens back on, and nods. If the cold gets worse, come east. There's a lean-to past the pine ridge. You'll see the smoke. Then he's gone. Disappears into the trees like a ghost that brought bacon. You bar the door that night and stare into the flames for a long time. You feel safer, and not, because now you know you're not alone. You go outside before bed just to clear your head. Snow crunches under your boots. The sky's heavy with clouds, the air still the forest holding its breath. You find the old tracks again, slowly fading under new snowfall. You stomp them out, not out of fear, but out of instinct. This land may be wide open, but now it feels watched. Historians still argue whether frontier life bred deep bonds between neighbors or long-standing feuds. Some communities were tight-knit sharing tools, raising cabins together. Others ended in gunfights over livestock or land boundaries barely scratched into trees. You climb back inside, hang your coat on the peg by the fire, and press your back to the door before sliding the brace into place. You've met your first neighbor. He was polite, friendly. You wonder what happens when one of you runs out of coffee or trust. But for tonight, the fire crackles. The nails are tucked into your shelf, and the cabin has held another day. The scream isn't human. You know that immediately. You also know it's close, too close, and rising in pitch like something that doesn't believe in subtlety. You sit up so fast your blanket flies off like a startled bird. The fire's burned low, the cabin's cold. But outside, something's hunting, or being hunted, or both. You grab your axe, cross to the window slit, and peek out. The moon is a pale smear behind fast-moving clouds, barely lighting the trees. But you see it just for a second. A large shape loping through the snow, heavy low to the ground fast. A bear. You don't move. It doesn't come near the cabin. Not yet. But you hear the huffing breath, the snapping of branches, and the way everything else in the woods has shut up, even the wind. So, let's talk about bear claws, gunpowder, and gut instincts. You sit back down by the fire, slowly, quietly, and begin to reload your rifle. It's a flintlock, slow, moody, and sometimes more decorative than functional. You open the powder tin Harlan traded you and pour a careful measure down the barrel. Patch, ball, ramrod, prime the pan. You do it by firelight, hands steady but cold. This isn't the first time you've done this, but it's the first time it's felt like you'll actually need it. Mainstream fact break. Most frontier settlers owned a long rifle or musket, often brought from the east or traded for labor. Ammunition was precious powder, and lead had to be carefully stored and used sparingly. One shot missed could mean hunting failure, or worse, becoming part of the local food chain. The bear doesn't come back that night, but it leaves tracks, huge ones, right through your clearing, across your woodpile, around the privy. You find them in the morning, along with the half-eaten remains of something unfortunate. Maybe a deer, maybe something smaller. It's mostly red and disturbing now. You follow the trail for 20 feet, then decide, nope, not today. You turn around and start reinforcing your cabin like it's about to be judged by a very angry forest god. First, you bar the door tighter. Not just your usual crossbeam, but 2 wedge braces from the floor up. Then you nail a plank over the bottom seam. Then you pile stones in front of it, just in case. You add a new peg rail, but for weapons. Axe, hatchet, knife, rifle. You keep them all within reach of your bed now. You haven't seen Kevin the mouse in 2 days. Smart mouse. Then you realize something else. The bear's not the only predator out here. And you're one too. So you decide to go on the offensive. You pack food, your knife, and your rifle, and follow the bear's trail east into the trees. You don't plan to attack, not unless it corners you, but you want to know where it's bedding down. You want to understand the threat. The snow is deeper today, the wind sharper. You walk in silence, boots crunching, rifle slung low. Every few steps you stop and listen. Birds, a creaking branch, distant rustle, then silence. Quirky tidbit. Some frontiersmen swore by carrying a pouch of dried blood or fish entrails to bait bears away from their cabins. Others left scraps far from home as a decoy. You have jerky, not the same effect. But still you tie a bit to a branch a good distance from the cabin and hope it works as an offering, or at least a distraction. You come upon the den around midday, a low dip under a thick pine partially snow-covered. It smells like fur and death. You see the shape inside, big black, barely breathing. The bear's asleep now. Thank everything holy. You mark the spot mentally, then back away. Back at the cabin, you build bear deterrents. A ring of sharpened stakes, not elegant, but effective. Rattling cans hung from the trees with twine. Okay, they're just dented tin cups, but they'll make noise. And a torch shelf by the door for fast lighting. You sleep that night with the rifle loaded and resting across your chest. You don't sleep well, but you sleep. Historians still argue whether bears actively stalked frontier cabins or just wandered too close. Some believe attacks were rare, most animals avoided humans. Others point to journals and grave markers that suggest otherwise. The truth: the wild doesn't care about statistics. Days pass. The bear doesn't return. But you stay ready, always. You listen harder. You walk softer. You move like something aware that every noise in the dark might be the last thing you hear. And then, ironically, it's not the bear that tests your nerves. It's gunshots, distant, faint, echoing across the frozen hills. 2, maybe 3. You drop your spoon, grab your rifle, and listen. Nothing else. Just the wind. You wait. Hours pass. No one comes. You wonder Harlan's strangers. Something else you don't know. But you check the trail, watch the tree line, sleep lighter. This is the wilderness version of a neighborhood watch. Stay alert. Stay armed. Stay alive. Later that week, you catch a glimpse. Not of the bear, but something worse. A man, far off, watching from the ridge. Not Harlan. Too tall. Too thin. No call. No movement. Just watching. You raise your rifle. Blink. He's gone. You don't sleep at all that night. But your traps stay untouched. Your woodpile stays full. The fire stays lit. And the bear, wherever it is, stays away. For now. Water is running where it shouldn't be. You hear it before you see it, just a faint trickling sound at first, like a leaky flask or a whispering creak. But it's inside. That's the part that makes your spine stiffen. You roll off your bed, still wrapped in your hide blanket, and your feet land in a puddle. Not mud, not snow tracked in. A real live puddle right in the middle of your puncheon floor. You grab a stick from beside the hearth and poke between the boards. Water seeps up like it's been waiting for this moment. Outside, the snow is melting. Spring has begun. And with it comes the return of leeks thaw and timber regrets. You throw open the door and are instantly hit with a gust of warmer air, damp, dense, and smelling like every soggy pine needle in the county. The world has gone from frozen quiet to slow, dripping chaos. Snowbanks collapse in chunks. Water runs in small rivulets across the clearing. Every tree seems to be sweating. And now so is your cabin. Mainstream fact break spring melt was a major challenge for frontier homes. Without proper drainage, cabins could flood, rot, or sink into the thawing soil. Some pioneers dug trenches around their homes to redirect runoff. Others raised their entire cabin on stones or logs to avoid turning their floor into a sponge. You have done none of that. So today's agenda: fix your swamp house before it becomes a bathtub. Step 1, dig a trench. You grab your spade, still dull from last fall, and start hacking into the thawing earth. It's like shoveling cold pudding laced with roots. The first trench runs parallel to the front wall, sloping gently away from the door. Then a second curves around the rear, following the line of your woodpile. You watch as the water starts to drain slowly, reluctantly, but moving. You guide it with sticks, redirect it with stones, whisper threats to it under your breath. By midday, the puddle inside has stopped growing. But the damage is clear, your floor is damp, your fire pit is soggy, and there's a disturbing mildew bloom in the corner behind your tool shelf. You haul the shelf outside, scrub it with pine needles and ash. You toss the affected wall moss and re-chink it with a dryer mix. You wedge bark slabs under the lowest parts of the floor to create a crude barrier. Everything smells like wet dog and burnt pine. Then comes the roof test. You climb up using the same notched log ladder you used to build the thing and find what you feared: gaps. Where the snow melted, the bark shingles shrank. Some of your pitch has cracked. Water is seeping through, especially near the north wall. You patch it with pine tar warmed over the fire and slapped into place with a flat stick. It's sticky, smelly, and somehow gets in your eyebrows. But it seals. You spend the rest of the day doing a full sweep, re-chink wall seams with a new layer of moss, clay, mud. Reseal the chimney stack where water is dripping down the stone. Replace 3 floorboards that have warped from the damp, and carve 2 new drainage channels leading away from the cabin, like little muddy escape routes. That night you sit on your stool and stare at the candle stub flickering on your shelf. Your cabin smells like mud. Your hands are blistered again, and your entire coat is wet on the inside, which feels like a personal betrayal. You lean back, listening to the quiet trickle of runoff outside. And that's when it hits you. This isn't the end of winter. It's just another fight. Because winter is loud and brutal, sure. But spring is sneaky. It melts your defenses, rots your foundation, creeps into seams and starts wars where you thought peace lived. Historians still argue whether spring was truly a time of hope for frontier folk. On one hand, food stores ran low, but hunting improved. On the other, thaw meant flooding, illness, and cabin collapses. Many journals speak of March as the cruelest stretch when winter lingers, but shelter begins to fail. Back inside, you cook a meager meal, dried beans, still rehydrating from yesterday. The fire pops loudly as it dries out the last of the damp logs. You rig a tarp above your bed using a spare hide and a few bent saplings. A backup, just in case the roof betrays you again tonight. As you settle in, you catch a glimmer of something in the corner: mushrooms. Tiny pale ones growing between 2 floorboards. You stare at them. You don't even react. You just say, "What today?" and pluck them out like weeds. You go to sleep with your boots hung near the fire to dry your axe within reach, and your head resting against the driest beam in the room. You dream of being underwater, of paddling a canoe through your cabin, of fish judging you silently as they pass by. You wake up with a damp elbow and a new puddle forming under the back wall. You sigh. You build a 3rd trench. Because out here, shelter isn't something you build once and admire. It's something you battle every day. Against cold, against rain, against wood that warps clay, that crumbles, and logs that suddenly remember their trees. And against water. So much water. The sun's out, not hiding, not filtered through gray clouds or dripping from icicle gutters. It's out clear and high and strangely warm, warming the cabin roof until steam rises from the bark, like the building itself is exhaling. You step outside and blink against the light. It's the first time in weeks you're not squinting through snow glare or ducking sleet. There are birds, actual birds, chattering in the branches, like they've returned from somewhere better and are here to gloat. You sit on the log outside the cabin, and sip lukewarm pine needle tea. And for the first time since this whole mad adventure began, you think you might have actually done it. The cabin stands, fully walled, fully roofed, chinked, floored, warm, and not full of raccoons, smoke, or puddles. But as you look at it now, really look, you notice the truth underneath the pride. It's crooked. The left side leans slightly in, like the walls tired of pretending to be vertical. The roof dips on the back corner. One log on the north face has split and warped in the cold, and looks like it wants to leap free the next time the wind gets frisky. The floorboards bowing. The table still wobbles, and that smell near the hearth still kind of suspicious. This cabin is complete, yes, but is it good? Welcome to the strange and quiet ache of cabin complete. But are you mainstream? Fact break, many early cabins were built fast and rebuilt faster. A first cabin might only last a few seasons before rot bugs, weather, or family size made it obsolete. Frontier homes were often upgraded slowly, log by log, beam by beam. No one expected their first effort to be perfect. They expected it to survive. You walk the perimeter, dragging your fingers along the log seams, tapping weak spots with the butt of your axe. There's a rhythm to it now, this inspection routine. You know where to look. You know which corners always betray you. You don't even hate it. But something in your chest has shifted. This place that once felt like victory now feels like a question. You step back and view the whole structure again, framed by pine trees and fresh mud and leftover snowdrifts. The sun catches the roofline at a funny angle, and now it's obvious the ridgepole is off by maybe an inch. The window hole leans left. There's a squirrel nesting in the roof overhang. You sigh, then laugh, because somehow this place has become a reflection of you, scarred, stubborn, off-kilter, but still standing. Quirky tidbit. Some settlers intentionally built flaws into their homes, believing perfection tempted fate or angered the spirits. One crooked beam, one mismatched corner, it was a message to the universe. This is enough. Please let me keep it. You sit inside that night, fire burning low, and take in the space. The shelf where your tools hang. The bed that still tilts a bit. The peg where your coat drips. The dented table and the stool you fixed 3 times. This is your life now. One log at a time. And you begin to notice the signs that spring is winning. The snow is gone from the south wall. Birds are stealing your moss, chinking for nests. Bugs have returned everywhere. A tiny green sprout is poking up through the hearthstones, and there's a squirrel now named Kevin Nasek. You even catch yourself planning things you don't technically need. A loft ladder, a second shelf. A proper door latch, a drying rack for herbs. Even though you've never successfully identified one, because now, with the core structure complete, your mind's moving ahead of your survival instincts. You're not just building to live anymore. You're building to live better. Historians still argue whether frontier settlers ever felt finished. Some say they never stopped improving, adding, expanding, restless and driven. Others suggest they eventually settled into quiet resignation, letting their cabins sag and lean as life took priority over legacy. You suspect both were right, because as you sit by the hearth that night, carving notches into a new shelf beam, you feel both proud and itchy. Proud of what you built. Itchy to change it, to fix it, to start over, maybe better this time. Cleaner, straighter, smarter. And yet, you pause. Because maybe, just maybe, this version of the cabin, slightly crooked, hastily sealed, still creaking in high winds, is the one that saved your life. The one you bled into, cursed at, fell asleep in with frozen toes and a loaded rifle on your chest. Maybe this one matters more than the one you could build next. You stare at the flame, thinking not just about what you've made, but what it's made of you. You used to flinch at the night sounds. Now you interpret them. You used to fear being alone. Now you prefer it. You used to wonder how long you'd last. Now you wonder what you'll build next. A second cabin, a shed, a smokehouse, a place for guests, a guest. You don't say it out loud, but it's there. That quiet echo of a future, of more than just surviving. Because today you didn't fix anything. You didn't patch a leak. You didn't fight the cold. You just lived. In a crooked, smoke-scented, off-center miracle you built with your own two shaking hands. And as the stars blink through the cracks above the hearth, you lean back against the log wall, your eyes heavy, your fire low, your cabin whole, at least for now. And now is enough. A warm breeze pushes through the cabin at dawn, slow and steady, as if the forest itself is exhaling for the first time in months. You sit up to the creaking of drying wood, the whisper of new leaves outside, and the sudden realization that you're not cold, not even a little. You stretch tight back, sore shoulder ankle still clicking, and pad across the puncheon floor barefoot. The boards are warm. The fire's out, but the cabin holds the heat. Just a trace, but enough to say you made it. Not just through a day, or a storm, or a long hungry night. Through the whole season. You step outside, blink against sunlight so bright it feels almost rude. The snow is completely gone now. Grass peeks through the leaf mold. A rabbit darts across your path and disappears into the underbrush, like it's late for something. You smile. And today you do something that frontier men rarely admitted to doing. You rest. Not laziness, not apathy, but the earned kind of stillness that comes when a long, brutal chapter closes. You sit on the log by the door, sip warm coffee, the last of it, courtesy of Harlan, and watch the clearing come back to life. It's almost hard to believe how this all started, just a man, an axe, and a suicidal level of optimism. Now, there's a cabin, leaning a little, smelling faintly of smoke, pine, and effort, but standing. Mainstream fact break. Once their cabins were livable, many settlers began modifying them over the following months, adding lean-tos, lofts, porches, even detached kitchens or storage sheds. Some would completely dismantle their first structure to rebuild better using the experience gained from their near-death winter. You look at your roof. The back corner still dips. You look at your walls. There's a new crack forming in the chinking. You glance at your door. Kevin has chewed a new hole near the bottom, and you think not. No, but okay. I'll fix it tomorrow, because today is for soaking it in. You wander the perimeter of the clearing. Your boot prints are drying in the mud. A few logs remain stacked by the woodpile, some already graying, some still sticky with sap. You touch one. It's soft, familiar. This place, this crooked box of logs and ambition, it changed you. At first you shaped the cabin. Now it's shaping you. Quirky tidbit. Some frontier men returned to visit their first cabins decades later, often finding them collapsed, half-eaten by moss or used as animal dens. But some were still standing, leaning cracked but intact. And when asked how, they often answered with a shrug and said, "I built it like I meant it." You begin carving that phrase into a plank by the door, built like I meant it. You plan to hang it above the threshold. And then through the trees, you hear footsteps. Not an animal, not a ghost, a person. You stand, heart ticking a little faster. You reach for your rifle just in case. It's Harlan. This time he's not alone. Behind him, a younger man, maybe his son, maybe a hired hand hauls a small sled of supplies. Salt, flour, tools, a folded tarp. Thought you might be short on a few things, Harlan says. Brought you a real chair. You blink. A chair. An actual four-legged, non-wobbly chair. You let them in. Share coffee. Trade stories. You show them the shelf with the tiny mushrooms now gone. The fire pit. The new pegs. The faint carving over the door. They nod. They don't say much. But when Harlan leaves, he puts a hand on your shoulder and says, "You've done something real here." And that's it. You sit in the chair. It creaks in a good way. The cabin is quiet again. The birds are louder now. The sky wider. The woods less threatening. You grab your journal. Write down 3 things: cut new roof pitch, rechink window seam, build porch, finally. Then you stare at the page and realize it doesn't feel like a survival list anymore. It feels like a plan. Historians still argue whether the men who built these first cabins ever truly felt at home, or if they were always chasing some future version of settled. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it was never about perfection, just progress and peace. So now, as the evening falls one more time and the fire inside your cabin flickers against soot-darkened logs, you sit in silence and let the warmth spread gently through your limbs. The cold still out there, the forest still humming, always watching. But the cabin, it breathes with you now. You lean your head against the wall and feel the slight give of weathered wood timber that bent but didn't break. You remember that first swing of your axe, that first fallen tree, the lean-to that leaked, the raccoon that judged you, the night you thought the roof would collapse, the days when your fingers bled from gripping frozen tools. All of it led here, to this crooked, creaking shelter, to this table, this chair, this life. You close your eyes, listening to the small sounds inside: fire popping floorboards, creaking, the soft whistle of wind squeezing through a seam you'll fix tomorrow. And you smile, just a little. Not because it's easy, not because it's perfect, but because you did it. You built a home from nothing. You endured the silence, the cold, the fear. You proved something maybe only to yourself. And that's more than enough. Now let the warmth settle in your bones. Let the breath slow. Let the thoughts quiet. Because tonight, the woods can whisper. The wind can wander. And the cabin will hold. Sweet dreams, pioneer. End of script. Sweet dreams.